Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We resume our conference with the interventions from representatives of government, intergovernmental organizations, UN system entities, and civil society. I would like to ask that the interventions be brief, as we have to start with a plenary as soon as we conclude this part of the conference. The first speaker on my list is the permanent representative of Pakistan, who will speak on behalf of the membership of the OIC. Pakistan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'm making these comments on behalf of the OIC member states as OIC Coordinator for Human Rights and Humanitarian Issues in Geneva. The OIC thanks the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People for organizing today's conference. We thank His Excellency, Mr. Nabil Shad, for stating very clearly that Palestine is for peace. We also thank OIC Assistant Secretary General for Al-Quds and Palestine, Mr. Samir Bakr, for his participation in today's event. The Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, in May 1976, in its first report to the Security Council, had recommended in paragraphs 59 and 60 that the question of Palestine is at the heart of the Middle East problem, and no solution in the Middle East can be envisaged which does not take fully into account the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people, the legitimate and inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to return to their homes and property and to achieve self-determination, national independence, and sovereignty are endorsed by the committee in the conviction that the full implementation of these rights will contribute decisively to a comprehensive and final settlement of the Middle East crisis. I unquote. The committee in 1976 had also clearly articulated that the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination could be exercised only in Palestine. Consequently, the exercise of the individual right of the Palestinians to return to his or her homeland was a condition sine qua non for the exercise by the Palestinian people of their rights to self-determination, national independence, and sovereignty. There is a binding obligation to permit the return of the Palestinian refugees. Madam President, it was thus clear even 40 years ago that what are the essential and crucial steps required to have durable peace in the region. Regrettably, the flagrant violations of the most fundamental right to life and the right to self-determination continue to take place. This is in violation of Common Articles 1 of the two International Covenants of Human Rights. The UN General Assembly has not only repeatedly affirmed the applicability of the Fourth Geneva Convention to the occupied Palestinian territory, but has also affirmed the illegality of the Israeli settlements in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem. Israeli policy of repression in occupied Palestinian territories continues through the disproportionate use of force, deliberate destruction of infrastructure, killing of civilians, illegal settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territories, and eliminating the religious and cultural heritage of Palestine. Madam President, such actions do not contribute to peace. They have become a major impediment and serve only to increase tension. The wave of tolerance across the the wave of violence across the occupied Palestinian territory needs to stop immediately. As mentioned by the OIC Assistant Secretary General for Al-Quds and Palestine, the OIC met in an extraordinary Islamic Summit meeting on Palestine just recently, entitled United for a Just Solution. They met in Jakarta. This summit meeting expressed alarm at the recent brutal assault against the Palestinian civilian population, as well as destructive actions on ground by the Israeli occupation forces throughout the occupied state of Palestine. The OIC leaders committed themselves to pursue concrete actions for peace. These actions included support towards the convening of an international conference that establishes a new collective process to advance efforts to attain a two-state solution for peace on the basis of the pre-1967 borders, within a clear and defined timetable in accordance with the internationally recognized terms of reference, including the Arab peace process. Madam President, OIC demands an end to Israeli settlements, including incentives to create them and the establishment of infrastructure to support them. ICJ advisory opinion on the construction of the wall in the OPT has to be implemented. The OIC also demands the release of all Palestinian prisoners from Israeli prisons, particularly children, women, and members of the Palestinian parliament. We also demand the immediate lifting of the siege imposed on occupied Gaza, as well as ask for the free movement and circulation of persons and goods within the OPT, including East Jerusalem, and with the outside world, by lifting of checkpoints and opening of borders and crossing points. The destruction of the Palestinian properties in East Jerusalem and altering the legal, geographic, and demographic character or status of Jerusalem has to stop, as also an important step for durable peace. The OIC calls for the establishment of the independent and sovereign state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. All this is necessary for prospects of peace to germinate and for peace to prevail. The OIC believes that peace is possible, and we should work hard towards this end. Peace is possible if the numerous resolutions of the UN General Assembly, United Nations Security Council, and UN Human Rights Council are implemented by Israel, and there is a genuine desire for peace by Israel. I thank you very much.
I thank the permanent representative of Pakistan for her speech, and now I give the floor to the representative of Nicaragua.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Okay. Excellencies, dear colleagues, Madam Chairperson, Nicaragua's engagement with the Palestinian cause remains unchanged. We reaffirm our absolute and unconditional support and solidarity with the Palestinian people in its struggle for its inalienable rights to self-determination, to national independence and sovereignty, and to live in peace. As a member of the Committee on the Inalienable Exercise of the Rights of the Palestinian People, the government of Nicaragua seeks to effectively contribute towards the attainment of a peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine. Madam Chairperson, recalling the relevant resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly, which call for the achievement without delay of an end to the Israeli occupation that began in 1967, the achievement of a two-state solution on the basis of the pre-1967 borders, the just resolution of all final status issues, and the mobilization of international support for an assistance to the Palestinian people, we concur with what has been stated by His Excellency Mr. Nabil Shahad, representative of the State of Palestine, a member of the Fatah Central Committee. Peace is possible. In this regard, Nicaragua is convinced that a two-state solution with Jerusalem as the capital of a sovereign state of Palestine is indeed possible. Nonetheless, and while we speak, we cannot ignore the remaining critical situation on the occupied territories in Palestine. Madam Chairperson, more than 2 years after the military incursion of Israel in Gaza, the situation in the Strip remains simply unacceptable. The humanitarian situation of tens of thousands of peoples affected by violence is devastating. The reconstruction has remained stagnated and it continues to be sabotaged by the occupying forces. The occupying power continues to impose, with impunity, severe restrictions on the import of materials for the near reconstruction. As of August of last year, not a single one of the destroyed homes in Gaza had been rebuilt, and over 100,000 Palestinians were still homeless. The situation has not evolved substantially since then, and we regret that member states of this very House remain accomplices to this, be it by their condoning silence or by actively supporting the Israeli government in its endeavors. In the West Bank, Israeli occupying forces continue to carry out military raids and incursions, resulting in the killing and injuring of Palestinians, including elders and children. Thousands of Palestinians, including women and children, are still being arbitrarily arrested and brought to Israeli jails and detention centers. Unarmed Palestinian civilians continue to be subjected to excessive force by Israeli forces when exercising their right to demonstrate against the unjust and illegal occupation of their land in exercise of their civil and political rights. Moreover, Madam Chairperson, as reiterated by the committee, Israel continue to expand its illegal settlements in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and has approved plans to build thousands more of these settlement units. Madam Chairperson, 12 years after the 2004 advisory opinion of the ICJ was rendered, the construction of the separation wall and its associated regime continues, fragmenting the Palestinian land and communities, obstructing movement and access for the isolating East Jerusalem, and severely affecting the socioeconomic conditions of the Palestinian people. The situation in occupied East Jerusalem remains alarming, with increased numbers of incursions in the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound and acts of incitement and provocation, as well as continued land confiscations, excavations of near holy sites, house demolitions, revocations of resident permits, and eviction of Palestinian residents. Madam Chairperson, as stated previously, nonetheless, we believe that peace is more than ever needed. But more than that, we need to gather the political will. We demand that, along with the support of all in the international community, the United Nations acts according to its principles and values contained in its charter. We have listened with interest to the different proposals put forward by other delegations, and will remain engaged in supporting any step towards a peaceful settlement of the Palestinian question, which will contribute to the peace in that region. Moreover, we call for a peace conference that could supervise the peace negotiations and the adoption of the peace agreement between the two parties. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
I thank the delegation of Nicaragua, and now I give the floor to the delegation of Venezuela.
Madame la Présidente, la République bolivarienne du Venezuela félicite au comité pour organiser cette réunion sur la paix et possible. Le Venezuela réaffirme les droits inaliénables du peuple palestinien, les droits à la autodétermination sans ingérence extérieure, les droits à l'indépendance et à la souveraineté nationale et les droits au retour des réfugiés palestiniens. Tout processus et initiative voulant apporter une paix juste et durable au conflit israélo-palestinien doit obligatoirement prendre en compte ces droits. L'initiative de paix doit également insister sur la fin de la politique de colonisation israélienne et le démantèlement de toutes les constructions illégales érigées dans les territoires occupés. Il est nécessaire de créer un horizon politique pour sauver la solution de deux États vivant en paix et en sécurité, avec la condition que les droits inaliénables du peuple palestinien soient pleinement pris en compte, avec Jérusalem et comme capitale de l'État palestinien libre et souverain, et les frontières établies en 1967. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
I thank the delegation of Venezuela, and now I give the floor to the delegation of Madagascar.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente. Madame la Présidente, l'opportunité m'est offerte aujourd'hui de participer à la présente conférence internationale des Nations Unies à l'appui de la paix israélo-palestinienne et d'intervenir au nom de la délégation de Madagascar. Madagascar, en sa qualité de membre du comité, tient à réaffirmer sa solidarité pour défendre les droits inaliénables du peuple palestinien. Le peuple malgache s'associe au reste de la communauté internationale dans son vif désir de trouver une solution de paix au conflit israélo-palestinien qui engendre une spirale de violence et met les deux pays dans une situation conflictuelle permanente et dont les conséquences dramatiques en défaveur des pays et des peuples du Moyen-Orient ne sont plus à démontrer. Cette conférence est ainsi l'occasion pour la délégation malgache de réitérer sa position selon laquelle l'option de la paix demeure la voie la plus pacifique et la plus indiquée, ce qui permettra à tous les peuples de la région de dépasser et de résoudre les causes de la tension. Nous appelons ainsi à la négociation et au dialogue, conformément aux dispositions du droit international ainsi qu'aux initiatives de paix constructives, et ce, en vue de parvenir à une solution négociée et durable à l'existence de deux États vivant côte à côte dans la sécurité, la concorde et la paix. Nous saisissons cette occasion pour faire à nouveau appel à la communauté internationale et aux bailleurs de fonds à apporter leur soutien accru au peuple palestinien afin de lui permettre de mieux vivre dans la dignité et la stabilité. Je vous remercie.
I thank the delegation of Madagascar and now give the floor to the delegation of Ecuador.
Gracias, embajador. Thank you, Excellency Maria Rubianes, for your commitment with the works of their committee. Excellency, allow me at the outset to take the opportunity to convey to the government of the State of Palestine, on behalf of the government and the people of Ecuador, our deepest gratitude for all the solidarity demonstrated with Ecuador after the earthquake that impacted the northern coastal zone of our territory on April 16th, particularly for sending a team of health professionals during the first phase of the disaster to provide medical emergency services to the victims of the earthquake. Ecuador has maintained historically a strong position in defense of the sovereign rights of Palestine, which coincides with all the relevant United Nations resolutions, particularly supporting the two-states solution. Ecuador strongly condemns the action undertaken by the State of Israel to diminish the possibility to reach such a solution, particularly through the permanent policy of establishing illegal settlements in Palestinian territory and modify the demographic composition of those territories, hiding the violence and human rights violations committed by colonizers and the armed forces of Israel and the police of the occupying power, as well as the destruction of Palestinian houses and their basic means of subsistence, of all with the purpose of forcing the displacement of the Palestinian population. Ecuador defends firmly the right cause of the Palestinian people to exercise its right to self-determination and independence, and fully recognizes the State of Palestine with its border before 1967, with Jerusalem East at its capital. In this sense, my government recognizes the Gaza Strip as an integral part of the Palestinian territory and condemns the unilateral and illegal blockade of this region that has affected severely the enjoyment of the human rights of its people, including, inter alia, the right to water, sanitation, health, education, among many others, including the right to development. In this regard, my delegation strongly rejects the violation of all the human rights of the Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian territories committed by the State of Israel, the military incursions and the attack to Palestinian civil population, the extrajudicial executions and the selective assassinations, the excessive and undiscriminated use of lethal force, the political persecution, the arbitrary detentions and the imprisonments for political reasons, including of children and adolescents, the use of torture and inhuman treatment. Ecuador considers that the only solution to stop these violations is the full recognition and respect of self-determination of the Palestinian people. This is the only way to end definitively the illegitimate situation of subordination derived from the illegal occupation by the State of Israel. For all these reasons, my government congratulates the holding of this conference organized by the Committee for the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, based on resolutions 7012 and 7013 of the General Assembly, and reiterates its commitment and support of the highest level to every effort to find a final, fair and acceptable solution to Palestinian issue and of the illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories by Israel. We have very high expectations that this process will conduct to concrete progress toward peace and to the achievement of a permanent and durable agreement that we are confident will have a positive impact in the reestablishment of peace and security in the whole region of Middle East. Thank you very much, Excellency.
I thank the delegation of Ecuador, and now I give the floor to the delegation of Saudi Arabia. They're not in the room, I think. I will give the floor to the delegation of China.
Madam Chairperson, the question of Palestine is the core of the Middle East question. The situation of no progress, no one cares, and no way forward cannot last long. The root cause for the escalation of Israeli-Palestinian conflict is due to the deep stalemate of the peace talks, which is the only way forward. We appeal to both sides to rebuild trust and confidence and strive for the early resumption of the peace talks. China supports the just cause of restoring the legitimate national rights of the Palestinian people, establishing a fully sovereign and independent state of Palestine based on the 1967 borders, and with Jerusalem as its capital. Earlier this year, President Xi Jinping made a comprehensive elaboration of China's principled position on the question of Palestine at the Arab League headquarters, and made robust appeals to activate peace talks politically and push forward reconstruction economically. China supports all efforts conducive to the easing of the Israeli-Palestinian situations and the early realization of the two-state solution. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, when attending the International Conference on Middle East Peace Process held in Paris on June 3rd, said that China stands for an early implementation of 3 stops: stop the violence, stop the settlement expansion, and stop the blockade of the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, he said China also invites concerned parties and the international community to work together to push for 3 explores: explore a wider range of efforts conducive to peace, explore peace talk follow-up measures, and explore an incentive mechanism for promoting peace. We should learn from the experiences in resolving the other Middle East hot issues, while continuing to make full use of the existing mechanism to promote talks. We should also explore the efforts of promoting peace with more extensive participation based on the Middle East Quartet, and welcome the Arab League and OIC to play more active roles. Particularly, due attention should be given to the leading role of the United Nations. Significant and interim achievements should be endorsed by the Security Council so as to ensure the effective implementation. China has always supported Palestine in its capacity building and made our contributions through such measures as humanitarian aid, training, and construction aid. This year, we have started the feasibility study on construction aid for the solar power station project in Palestine. We will also provide fresh humanitarian aid to Palestine amounting to 50 million renminbi yuan. China is ready to join the international community in a continued effort to promote a bona fide solution of the Israel-Palestinian issue. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
I thank the delegation of China, and now I give the floor to the delegation of Algeria.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. اسمحوا لي بداية أن بتقديم الشكر إلى لجنة الأمم المتحدة المعنية بممارسة الشعب الفلسطيني لحقوقه غير القابلة للتصرف على دعمها المستمر والدؤوب للشعب الفلسطيني وتنظيمها للاجتماع الدولي دعما للسلام الإسرائيلي الفلسطيني. كما يرحب وفد الجزائر بالسيد نبيل شاعث والوفد المرافق له لهذا الاجتماع. الجزائر تؤيد البيان الذي ألقته سعادة سفيرة باكستان باسم منظمة التعاون الإسلامي. ننتهز هذه الفرصة لنجدد دعم الجزائر لحق الشعب الفلسطيني الشرعي في تقرير مصيره وإقامة دولة فلسطين المستقلة عاصمتها القدس الشريف على حدود ما قبل 4 جوان 1967 وفق المبادئ الأساسية والشروط الموضوعية لتحقيق سلام عادل ودائم في فلسطين والشرق الأوسط في ظل الشرعية الدولية المنصوص عليها في قرارات مجلس الأمن والجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة راعية السلام والأمن الدوليين ذات الصلة، وخاصة قرار مجلس الأمن رقم 242 لسنة 1967 والذي ينص صراحة على أن إقامة سلام عادل ودائم في الشرق الأوسط يقتضي تطبيق مبدأين: أولا انسحاب القوات الإسرائيلية من الأراضي التي احتلتها في النزاع، ثانيا أن تنهي كل دولة حالة الحرب، وأن تحترم وتقرر الاستقلال والسيادة الإقليمية والاستقلال السياسي لكل دولة في المنطقة وحقها في أن تعيش في سلام في نطاق حدود مأمونة ومعترف بها متحررة من أعمال القوة أو التهديد بها. ثانيا قرار مجلس الأمن رقم 338 لسنة 73 الرامي لتطبيق القرار السابق، إلى جانب قرار مجلس الأمن رقم 1397 لسنة 2002 الذي يدعو إلى إنهاء حالة الصراع عبر حل الدولتين. أخيرا قرار مجلس الأمن، وليس آخرا، قرار مجلس الأمن رقم 1515 لسنة 2003 الذي يؤيد خارطة الطريق التي وضعتها اللجنة الرباعية لحل القضية الفلسطينية، موازاة مع كل القرارات الدولية ذات الصلة الواضحة والصارحة بخصوص شروط التسوية السلمية العادلة. عرفت قضية السلام في الشرق الأوسط جهودا ومبادرات دولية لتحقيق تسوية عادلة وفق الشرعية الدولية تستحق التنويه. نخص بالذكر منها المبادرة العربية التي اعتمدت في قمة بيروت سنة 2002 التي وضعت النقاط على الحروف بشكل صريح وواضح ومباشر بخصوص متطلبات التسوية السلمية للصراع، والتي ترتكز على الشرعية الدولية ومبدأ الأرض مقابل السلام. إن التمسك بهذه المبادرة يترجم الإرادة السياسية الحسنة والفعلية للدول العربية من أجل إحياء مسار السلام ووضع حد لهذا النزاع الذي طال أمده بكل ما يحمله من ظلم للشعب الفلسطيني الأعزل. إلا أن وجود قرارات تكرس الشرعية الدولية وتعدد المبادرات الدولية قابلتها سياسات التسويف والالتفاف والتعنت الإسرائيلي، مما أدى إلى إطالة أمد الانسداد والجمود وغياب أفق حل القضية الفلسطينية. أضف إلى ذلك استمرار إسرائيل القوة القائمة بالاحتلال بموجب القانون الدولي في وضع إجراءات تخرق القوانين الدولية من استيطان ومصادرة الأراضي الفلسطينية وتدمير البنية التحتية وتهويد القدس الشريف على حساب المعالم المسيحية والإسلامية التاريخية، ومواصلة المساس بالمقدسات والتهديد بانتهاكها، إلى جانب المجازر التي ارتكبتها دون تمييز أو رادع إنساني أو أخلاقي في انتهاك صارخ لمواثيق حقوق الإنسان. كما لا يستطيع وفد بلادي التغاضي عن الوضع الإنساني المتردي والحرج للغاية، خاصة في قطاع غزة الذي لا يزال يرزح تحت الحصار غير الشرعي منذ 9 سنوات. فمقابل المبادرة العربية التي اتخذت من السلام خيارا استراتيجيا، اعتمدت إسرائيل على سياسات تضرب عرض الحائط بالقوانين والقرارات الدولية وتطيح بكل الاتفاقات من أوسلو إلى مفاوضات 2013 مرورا بخارطة الطريق لسنة 2002 ومسار أنابوليس في 2007. هدف هذه السياسات العدوانية هو نسف أي أمل للشعب الفلسطيني يتيح له ممارسة حقه في تقرير مصيره وإقامة دولته عاصمتها القدس الشريف. السيد الرئيس، إن الجزائر إذ تثمن القرار الأممي الجمعية العامة رقم 67/119 الذي أعطى لفلسطين صفة دولة غير عضو في الأمم المتحدة، ترى أن إعطاء فلسطين صفة الدولة كاملة العضوية في الأمم المتحدة من شأنها أن يعطي دفعا قويا لمسار جاد للسلام. يحذون الأمل أن يفتح هذا المؤتمر آفاقا جديدة تفضي إلى مفاوضات جدية بما فيها حل الدولتين وفق مرجعيات السلام وجدول زمني محدد. كما تدعو المجتمع الدولي إلى تحمل مسؤولياته إزاء الشعب الفلسطيني واتخاذ مواقف عادلة وحازمة تلزم إسرائيل باحترام المواثيق والأعراف والشرعية الدولية من أجل إعطاء فرصة لسلام عادل ودائم وشامل قائم على حل الدولتين. وإذ تجدد الجزائر موقفها الثابت تؤكد على أن جهود المجتمع الدولي لابد أن تتجسد بما يسمح للشعب الفلسطيني بممارسة حقه في تقرير مصيره وإقامة دولة فلسطين المستقلة عاصمة القدس الشريف على حدود 4 جوان 1967. وشكرا على الكرم الإصغاء.
I thank the delegation of Algeria, and now I give the floor to the delegation of Malaysia.
Madam Chairperson, thank you for convening this conference. This conference provides an opportunity to engage and exchange views on the way forward for peace between Palestine and Israel. Madam Chairperson, there have been many initiatives to resolve the conflict between Palestine and Israel. Despite these, peace between Palestine and Israel remains elusive and the prospects for peace becoming dimmer. In our view, the prospect becoming dimmer is attributed to the occupying power being allowed to act with impunity. Impunity allows the occupying power to be confident and secure that no action will be taken against them. It allows them to continue illegal settlements, expand its occupation, and disregard the rights of the Palestinian people. All these actions threaten the prospect of a two-state solution. All parties must respect and adhere to international law. International law exists to guide the conduct of states and to ensure that states are accountable for their actions. It is universal and it cannot be invoked nor adhered to selectively. Madam Chairperson, my delegation welcomes efforts to revive the stalled Middle East peace process. We look forward to the Quartet's report to review the situation on the ground, to identify the threats to a two-state solution, and to provide recommendations on how to advance peace. We commend France on its initiative to convene an international conference on Palestine before the end of the year. We remain hopeful that the conference would provide some impetus to revive the peace process and bring the two sides together to resume negotiations to end the conflict. We applaud the work of the Committee on the Exercise of Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People in convening conferences such as this one. The wide range of participants provides a broad spectrum for discussion and views which could be useful to the efforts of finding peace. Madam Chairperson, the conflict has lasted for far too long. Generations of Palestinians have only known of life under oppression, of life where dignity is robbed and basic human rights denied. This should not be the case. The people of Palestine have the right to self-determination, a self-determination without external interference, with national independence and with sovereignty, as reflected in General Assembly Resolution 3236 on the question of Palestine. The international community must come together and work towards creating an environment conducive to achieving a fair and long-lasting peace between Palestine and Israel based on the principles of international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. I thank you.
I thank the delegation of Malaysia, and now I give the floor to the delegation of Kuwait.
السيدة الرئيسة، بداية تتقدم دولة الكويت بالشكر الجزيل للقائمين على عقد هذا المؤتمر لدعم السلام الإسرائيلي الفلسطيني وعلى جهودهم التي بذلت ولا تزال مستمرة تجاه انتهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وإيجاد حل للقضية الفلسطينية. إن دولة الكويت تؤمن بأن السلام الشامل والعادل في المنطقة لن يتحقق إلا من خلال إقامة الدولة الفلسطينية وعاصمتها القدس، وأن الانتهاكات الإسرائيلية تقف حجر عثرة وعائقا أمام تحقيق السلام في المنطقة. السيدة الرئيسة، تدعو دولة الكويت مجلس الأمن إلى تحمل مسؤولياته والتحرك لاتخاذ الخطوات اللازمة ووضع الآليات العملية لحل الصراع العربي الإسرائيلي بكافة جوانبه وتحقيق السلام العادل والشامل وإنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي للأراضي الفلسطينية والعربية المحتلة. السيدة الرئيسة، إن إسرائيل تتحمل بتصرفاتها المسؤولية الكاملة عن تعثر عملية السلام، واستمرار التوتر في الشرق الأوسط، وهي مطالبة باحترام الشرعية الوطنية الفلسطينية بقيادة الرئيس محمود عباس، ومطالبة بوقف إجراءاتها لتغيير هوية القدس الشريف ومعالمها، واستمرار الاستيطان والاعتقال التعسفي والعقاب الجماعي للشعب الفلسطيني في الأراضي المحتلة. السيدة الرئيسة، لقد دعت العديد من المحافل الدولية إسرائيل للنهوض بمسؤولياتها الدولية، ولهذا فإننا ندعو مرة أخرى المجتمع الدولي لحشد الدعم والتحرك للاستئناف الفوري لمفاوضات السلام المؤدية إلى إنهاء الصراع الإسرائيلي الفلسطيني، والعمل على حل سلمي وفقا لقرارات مجلس الأمن ذات الصلة ومبادرة السلام العربية، مؤكدين دعمنا الكامل واللازم للشعب الفلسطيني للوصول إلى دولته الفلسطينية المستقلة وذات السيادة على أساس حدود عام 1967 وبحل جميع قضايا الوضع النهائي، ويؤدي ذلك إلى أمن وسلام إقليمي شامل، مطالبين مجلس الأمن أيضا بإصدار قرار لتوفير الحماية الدولية وإنفاذ قراراته ذات الصلة. السيدة الرئيسة، إن دعم دولة الكويت للشعب الفلسطيني يمثل مبدأ ثابتا وأساسي في سياسة دولة الكويت الخارجية، فقد احتضنت دولة الكويت القيادة والشعب الفلسطيني منذ البداية، واعتبرتها قضيتها الأولى، وساندت الحق الفلسطيني بكافة الأشكال وجميع الأصعدة، وسوف نواصل هذا الدعم لكي يحصل الشعب الفلسطيني على كامل حقوقه. وشكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
I thank the delegation of Kuwait, and now I give the floor to the delegation of Libya. Libya, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. يود وفد ليبيا ونيابة عن حكومة الوفاق الوطني أن يعرب عن ترحيبه بمعالي السيد نبيل شعت ممثل دولة فلسطين والوفد المرافق له، كما يرحب بالسيد مايكل مولر ممثل الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة، والسيد فوديسك رئيس اللجنة المعنية بممارسة الشعب الفلسطيني لحقوقه غير القابلة للتصرف. لقد بات الشعب الفلسطيني ومنذ عقود طويلة محروما من نيل حقوقه المشروعة في العودة إلى أرضه المحتلة وتقرير مصيره وإقامة دولته المستقلة كبقية الشعوب في العالم. وللأسف لم يقتصر الأمر على هذا الحد، فالسلطة الإسرائيلية القائمة بالاحتلال بدلا من أن تعمل في اتجاه تحقيق السلام فإنها لم تضع حدا لجرائم الحرب والانتهاكات الجسيمة لحقوق الإنسان التي ترتكبها تجاه الشعب الفلسطيني، وهي تواصل سياسة التوسع الاستيطاني وتصادر المزيد من الأراضي وما يتبع ذلك من تدمير لممتلكات وأراضي الفلسطينيين وحماية أنشطة المستوطنين العدائية تجاههم، وارتكاب المجازر وقتل المدنيين واعتقال الآلاف من أبناء الشعب الفلسطيني وبناء الجدران العازلة وفرض الحصار اللا إنساني وغير القانوني على قطاع غزة لفرض العقاب الجماعي على أهل القطاع وحرمانهم من أبسط مقومات الحياة، وتهويد القدس ومحاولة فرض السيادة على الحرم القدسي، ومواصلة ممارسة كافة أشكال العقاب الجماعي بهدف قمع الشعب الفلسطيني، وممارسة كافة أشكال التمييز العنصري تجاهه. لا شك أن استمرار الاحتلال وممارسة مختلف أشكال العدوان والانتهاكات المناقضة للمواثيق الدولية ذات الصلة يقوض من فرص تحقيق سلام عادل وشامل في المنطقة، بل ويفاقم حالة الاحتقان وعدم الاستقرار فيها، الأمر الذي يضع مصداقية المجتمع الدولي على المحك أكثر من أي وقت مضى، وبات عليه اتخاذ إجراءات عاجلة وحاسمة من أجل وقف اعتداءات سلطات الاحتلال على الشعب الفلسطيني وما يتعرض له من انتهاكات خطيرة لحقوق الإنسان، وإنهاء حالة الإفلات من العقاب والعمل بكل الوسائل التي من شأنها إنهاء حالة الاحتلال وتمكين الشعب الفلسطيني من ممارسة حقوقه المشروعة غير القابلة للتصرف الحق في العودة وحق تقرير المصير وإقامة دولته المستقلة وعاصمتها القدس الشريف، وهو الأساس الذي يمكن البناء عليه لإنجاح أي عملية يرجو منها تحقيق سلام دائم في المنطقة. وشكرا سيد الرئيس.
I thank the delegation of Libya, and now I give the floor to the delegation of Iraq.
السيدة الرئيس، في البداية أود أن أتقدم بالشكر إلى رئيس وأعضاء اللجنة على جهودهم المبذولة في تنظيم هذا المؤتمر، وعلى جهودهم المخلصة للتعريف بقضية فلسطين وتعزيز الدعم والتأييد والتضامن الدولي مع حقوق الشعب الفلسطيني، وفضح الممارسات والانتهاكات التي تقوم بها سلطات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي، إذ يتعرض الشعب الفلسطيني ومقدساته نتيجة الاحتلال العسكري الإسرائيلي، وهو الأطول في التاريخ المعاصر، يتعرض لأصعب الظروف من خلال سياسة الاستيطان الإسرائيلي والاستيلاء على الأراضي والحصار الجائر والجدار العنصري، إضافة إلى نهب المصادر الطبيعية وتغيير التركيبة الديمغرافية لمدينة القدس الشريف وطمس هويتها العربية والإسلامية دون رادع سياسي أو قانوني أو أخلاقي، متجاهلة جميع القرارات الدولية ذات الصلة، والاستمرار بامتلاك الترسانة النووية وأسلحة الدمار الشاملة الأخرى. وفي الوقت الذي نؤكد فيه تضامننا مع الشعب الفلسطيني لاستعادة حقوقه المشروعة، نجدد دعوتنا للمجتمع الدولي بإنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وتحمل مسؤولياته لتأمين الحماية الدولية اللازمة للشعب الفلسطيني. السيد الرئيس، إن السلام لا يمكن أن يكون فرضا وفق المواصفات الإسرائيلية، ولا يمكن أن يكون منحة من إسرائيل مقابل أرض احتلتها أصلا، بل إن السلام حق مشروع لشعب فلسطين وأن ينعم بحقوقه والعيش بكرامة. وأغتنم هذه المناسبة للتأكيد مجددا على دعم وتضامن جمهورية العراق مع حكومة وشعب فلسطين في سعيها لاستعادة الحقوق الوطنية، بما في ذلك حق العودة وتقرير المصير وإقامة دولته المستقلة على الأراضي الفلسطينية وعاصمتها القدس الشريف. وشكرا جزيلا السيد الرئيس.
I thank the delegation of Iraq, and now I give the floor to the delegation of Somalia. Somalia, have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. May I begin saying thank you for the committee who prepared this conference, which is the International Conference in Support of Israeli-Palestinian Peace. I would like also to say that Somalia also condemns the terrorists that attack Istanbul in the strongest term. Somalia sends its condolences to the people and the government of Turkey. We stand in solidarity with our Turkish brothers and sisters and reaffirm Somalia's commitment to working hard to tackle terrorism. As our president say, it's a global problem which requires a united global response. Madam Chairperson, the plight facing Palestinians has always been on the conscience of Somalia. I want to assure that Somalia will stand side by side with the Palestinians until they reach the realization of their objective. Respecting and promoting the rights of Palestinians is paramount to achieving a consensual solution and a basis to many of present problems, including respecting their dignity, their human rights, access to food, to water, to education, and basic health care to Palestinian people and all inhabitants of Gaza. We give our support to various Security Council resolutions restoring and respecting the 1967 boundaries with Jerusalem as a capital. The right to self-determination and to the state based on this premise secures the human right of the Palestinian people, their aspiration in peace and security. We reiterate the calls from the international community to put an immediate end to Israeli occupation, settlements, blockades on 2 million people in the Gaza Strip the detained and imprisonment of thousands of Palestinians, and all other forms of collective punishment targeting the oppressed Palestinian people. The occupation of almost 50 years continues to diminish trust, hopes, and dreams to lead a prosperous and vibrant life that we all enjoy with our families, communities, and friends. There are legitimate aspirations that Palestinians deserve. Security measures alone is not sufficient to eradicate the ongoing tension and violence. We believe there is an urgent need to take other concrete steps to consolidate the peace process. We believe in a two-state solution, and which is a prerequisite to lasting peace and security of both countries and the region. We call upon the international community to sustain and strengthen its efforts to push ahead for the desired durable solution. I thank you, Madam Chairperson.
I thank the delegate of Somalia, and now I give the floor to the delegation of Tunisia.
لي أن أعرب عن ترحيب وفد بلادي بعقد هذا المؤتمر الذي نوجه من خلاله رسالة دعم قوية إلى أشقائنا الفلسطينيين، ورسالة كذلك إلى المجتمع الدولي مفادها أن القضية الفلسطينية يجب أن تكون في صدارة كل القضايا الدولية التي لا بد من إيجاد حل لها، بما يضع حدا لمعاناة الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق ويسهم في إشاعة مناخ من السلم والأمن في المنطقة. السيدة الرئيسة، لقد دعمت تونس مفاوضات السلام الفلسطينية الإسرائيلية منذ انطلاقها، وما فتئت تدعم كل المبادرات والجهود الدولية الرامية إلى تثبيت حق الشعب الفلسطيني في تقرير مصيره واسترداد حقوقه المشروعة في إقامة دولته الحرة المستقلة ذات السيادة على أراضيه المحتلة سنة 67 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية، وذلك وفقا لقرارات الشرعية الدولية ومبادرة السلام العربية، بما يمكن من تعايش جميع الأطراف في المنطقة في كنف سلام عادل ودائم وشامل. وبالرغم من سياسات إسرائيل القمعية والعدوانية إزاء الشعب الفلسطيني وأمعانها في نهجها الاستيطاني والمساس بالمعالم التاريخية الفلسطينية في الأراضي المحتلة وتغييرها والعبث بالمقدسات الإسلامية والمسيحية وتغيير معالمها ضمن سياسة التهويد التي تتعرض لها القدس بالأساس، فإن السلام يظل رغم ذلك خيارا استراتيجيا، لأن حل القضية الفلسطينية هو مفتاح السلام في منطقة أرهقتها المظالم والحروب والنزاعات. وحتى لا يكون هذا السلام مجرد شعار، فعلى المجموعة الدولية والقوى الفاعلة والمنظمات الدولية وهياكلها المختصة وفي مقدمتها مجلس الأمن الدولي أن تتحمل مسؤولياتها إزاء هذه القضية، أي القضية الفلسطينية، وتحمل إسرائيل على الإيفاء بالتزاماتها وفقا للمرجعيات الدولية ذات الصلة حتى لا تشعر بأنها قوة فوق القانون وفوق المحاسبة. وشكرا.
I thank the delegation of Tunisia, and now I give the floor to the representative of the Gulf Cooperation Council.
شكرا السيدة الرئيسة. يسرني أن أشارك باسم مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية في هذا المؤتمر الهام الذي نناقش من خلاله سبل تحقيق السلام الفلسطيني الإسرائيلي، ونثمن عبرها الجهود الإقليمية والدولية المماثلة والرامية لحل القضية الفلسطينية، ومن ضمنها مؤخرا المبادرة الفرنسية. وفي هذا السياق نؤكد على الموقف الراسخ لمجلس التعاون حيال القضية الفلسطينية، وعلى قناعتنا بأن السلام الشامل والعادل والدائم لا يتحقق إلا بالانسحاب الإسرائيلي الكامل من كافة الأراضي العربية المحتلة عام 67، وإقامة الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية طبقا لمبادرة السلام العربية التي صدرت عن القمة العربية في بيروت، ومبادئ مدريد وأوسلو وقرارات الشرعية الدولية ذات الصلة التي تلزم إسرائيل بالانسحاب الكامل من الأراضي العربية المحتلة عام 67. السيدة الرئيسة، عقبات كثيرة تقف بوجه تحقيق السلام في ظل الوضع الراهن، من أهمها مساعي الاحتلال لتغيير هوية ومعالم القدس الشريف وتقسيم المسجد المبارك زمنيا ومكانيا وتهويد القدس الشريف وعزلها عن محيطها الفلسطيني والعربي، كما وأن السياسة الاستيطانية التي لا يزال الاحتلال الإسرائيلي ينتهجها على الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة تشكل كذلك عقبة أساسية في طريق تحقيق سلام دائم وشامل، إضافة إلى كونها سياسات غير شرعية بموجب القانون الدولي وتنتهك المادة 49 من اتفاقية جنيف الرابعة بشكل سافر. هذا عدا عن الجرائم التي يرتكبها الاحتلال بحق الفلسطينيين بشكل يومي طيلة 70 عاما، وصولا إلى الحصار الجائر المفروض على قطاع غزة منذ عام 2006. السيدة الرئيسة، إن مسار السلام الحقيقي يبدأ بوقف القوة القائمة بالاحتلال لانتهاكاتها لكي تهدأ النفوس وعدم المساهمة بتدهور الأوضاع وزيادة ردات الفعل العنيفة. ختاما، إن الاعتراف الدولي بفلسطين هو خطوة أساسية في مسار السلام، وعلى المجتمع الدولي أن يقوم بكل ما في وسعه لتحفيز العمل بمبادرات السلام والضغط على الاحتلال الإسرائيلي لرفع ظلمه عن الشعب الفلسطيني وضمان حقوقه وبالأخص حقه بتقرير المصير. وشكرا السيد الرئيس.
I thank the delegation from the Gulf Cooperation Council, and now I give the floor to the representative of the International Committee of the Red Cross.
Good afternoon. I'm reading this on behalf of Robert Mardini, the ICRC's Regional Director for the Near and Middle East, who was unable to attend because of an urgent matter. Honourable representatives of the United Nations, of the State of Palestine and other governments, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honour to be here today to address such an important and influential audience. Sadly, we're all aware of the cost of the protracted conflict in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. It is tragically high, including on the human, material and psychological fronts. The International Committee of the Red Cross has been working in the Palestinian territories in Israel since 1948, and we've established a permanent presence in 1967, almost 5 decades ago. We've worked tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of the civilian population affected by the conflict. Respect for international humanitarian law remains the top priority in today's world, where modern warfare always results in a heavy toll on civilian life. In Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territory, the ICRC has kept its role as guardian of IHL as mandated by the states through the Geneva Conventions. We've also done our best to alleviate the suffering and bring assistance to the victims, whether this be bringing expert surgeons to deliver emergency care or war surgery, rehabilitating key electricity and water networks, or helping farmers build new sources of income. We want to continue doing that as long as it is needed, but we will not shy away from reminding all weapons bearers, no matter where their loyalties lie, that civilians and persons no longer fighting must be spared in all circumstances. Together with our sister organizations, the Palestine Red Crescent Society and the Magen David Adom, we remain firmly committed to help those in need. But, honorable hosts and guests, humanitarian action, even when efficient and widely accepted, cannot provide what the affected people need most. More than new houses, new hospitals and new schools. More than compliance with international humanitarian law and reinforced security measures. What civilians in Israel and Palestine really need is something even more precious, it is hope. Hope for a better future without bloodshed, where security, education, freedom of movement and well-being are available to all. Parties to the conflict and the international community have the duty to break this vicious cycle of violence and closures. Excellencies, it is imperative that a political solution is found to break the current deadlock. This is your task and responsibility. You can take the humanitarian commitment of the ICRC for granted, but once again, please do not leave us alone. it is high time to ignite a meaningful political process. I sincerely hope that the discussions you will have here will pave the way for a better future. More than bold promises, people living in Israel and Palestine need more than ever that promises and intentions materialize in concrete and positive actions. Thank you.
The representative from the International Committee of the Red Cross. And now I give the floor to the representative of the International Telecommunications Union.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Your Excellencies, distinguished ambassadors, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure and honor to speak on behalf of the Secretary General of the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, at this UN conference. I'd like to take this opportunity to speak briefly about the contribution of ITU to Palestine in the area of telecommunication and information communication technologies, ICT. Here are a few examples of our contribution. During recent ITU major conferences, such as the 2014 Plenipotentiary Conference, the 2015 World Radio Communication Conference, WRC 15, and the 2014 World Telecommunication Development Conference, various resolutions related to Palestine were adopted. These resolutions address the status of Palestine in ITU, the assistance and support to Palestine for rebuilding its telecommunication network, the assistance and support to Palestine on spectrum-related issues, and special technical assistance to Palestine. The three sectors of ITU, radio communication, telecommunication standardization, telecommunication development, have been working over the past years in the implementation of these resolutions. One of the most recent achievements was the approval by WRC 15 of modifications to Resolution 12, welcoming the bilateral agreement on principles for assignment of new frequencies for Palestinian mobile operators. This agreement was elaborated through the Joint Technical Committee and signed by concerned parties on 19 November 2015, and invites member states to support the timely implementation in 2016 in Palestine of new technology, notably third-generation mobile. The ITU Secretary General made every effort to accompany both parties in the process of concluding this bilateral agreement, as well as of revising Resolution 12. In this context, the two parties recently informed the Secretary General of the status of implementation of the agreement signed in November 2015. According to the progress report, not only have the two parties resumed a constructive dialogue and close contacts at both the technical and ministerial levels, but also the process of assigning new frequencies, notably the 2100 MHz band, appears to be on track. Important elements remain to be negotiated, but thanks to the goodwill and spirit of cooperation shown by the stakeholders, as well as to the involvement of respective administrations, the Secretary General is optimistic that the objective of implementation of new mobile technologies in Palestine in 2016 could be achieved. The Secretary General appreciates the efforts to other member states who have contributed a lot to this progress of the processes mentioned. The Secretary General encouraged the two parties to continue their discussions and their efforts driven by this positive spirit of cooperation. The Secretary General will continue to work together with the parties concerned to ensure the best possible benefit ICT can bring to the population of this region. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I thank the representative of the International Telecommunications Union. We have heard the last speaker on our list among the delegations. I want to thank all the member states and organizations that have expressed their solidarity and support with the state of Palestine and its people in their quest for peace, security, and development. Thank you very much to all the delegations. We will now start with Plenary 1. Excellencies, distinguished experts, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon again. We are ready to begin our deliberations with the first plenary session entitled Learning from Madrid to the Present. I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers who are going to share their valuable knowledge and experience. According to established practice, we shall first listen to the presentations, and then the floor will be open for questions and comments from the audience, to which the speakers will respond. Also, we would like to remind our participants that in the spirit of going green, we only make a limited number of printouts of the documents, but you may visit our website, unispal.un.org, to get copies of the documents. You can also get all the documents by scanning the QR code of the conference on the entrance tablets. All participants are also encouraged to use the hashtag on the screen behind us to disseminate information about the conference on their social media. Thank you for understanding. The theme of our plenary is Learning from Madrid to the Present. It is my pleasure now to present to you our keynote high-level speaker, excellent speaker this afternoon, His Excellency Minister Mohammad Shtayyeh, President of the Palestinian Economic Council for Development and Reconstruction and a senior advisor to President Mahmoud Abbas on negotiations with Israel. Recently, Mr. Shtayyeh, together with Saeb Erekat, served as the Palestinian negotiators during the 2013-14 round of talks with Israel, shepherded by the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. Mr. Shtayyeh intimates first-hand involvement in the peace negotiations over the years makes him preeminently qualified to speak on the subject of Oslo I and II, a Palestinian perspective and the future of the two-state paradigm. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you, sir, with us. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the kind introduction. And listening to all the speeches by the different delegates, it really gives me hope. And following the footsteps of the gentle lady who spoke on behalf of ICRC, I think I would like to quote Einstein, who said we have to accept the depressing reality without losing hope in the future. But before I go into my intervention, I would like to congratulate those who are fasting on the Shahr al-Mubarak Ramadan and wish you a happy Eid in the next week. Madam, in the reviewing of the peace process from Madrid until today, there are so many depressing realities, but we will not lose focusing on the hope of the future. And for us, the Palestinians, the reality on the ground is not a very pleasant one, as most of the speakers who are very knowledgeable have gently and have accurately described. There is real suffering on the ground. There is a siege on Gaza. There are hundreds of checkpoints on the West Bank. There are 6,522 Palestinians who are in the Israeli prisons. There are Palestinians who are killed daily, including a boy of 14 years old who was killed the day before yesterday, getting out of the swimming pool. There are 185 Jewish settlements with 680,000 Jewish settlers. There is land confiscation on daily basis. There is incursions in the Holy Mosque of Al-Aqsa. There is settler violence. There is 28% of the Palestinian labor force is unemployed, which leads to a depressing reality of poverty in both of the West Bank and Gaza. And there is a real political impasse since the last round of talks shepherded by John Kerry. the Palestinians and the Israelis have not been really engaged in any negotiations. But also, there are few landmarks that are ahead of us between this conference that is held by the Committee on the Alienable Rights of the Palestinian People, which I had the pleasure and the honor to participate with you over the last so many years. And I really commend the effort that the committee is doing to keep the cause of Palestine alive in the minds of the people, and to keep, and this committee is also an eye-opener for what is possible and what is not possible. The French initiative, the Quartet report, and all the efforts, including the Egyptian effort, is an attempt to try to put things in place. But before we put things in place, what are the conclusions, what are the lessons to draw from the past? It is very important. Madam Chair, I had the pleasure to be the first Palestinian who landed in Madrid, October 1991. At that time, I did not have a gray hair and I was not married. Today, my hair is not anymore black. And my brother and friend Nabil Shaath, who is sitting there, Riyadh is also, his hair is white. And I remember these people whom I had the pleasure to work with. We were young at that time, but after 25 years of talking, the reality on the ground changed and we change, and the way we see reality is different. But let me tell you what happened. We went to Madrid, October 91, after the liberation of Kuwait. And we went to Annapolis after the American war on Iraq. And today we are going to the international conference in Paris. There is an international coalition against radicalism and fundamentalism represented by ISIS and so on and so forth. So it seems that after some sort of catastrophic regional event, the Palestinians are reminded in a way or another. The Palestinian-Israeli agreement had many important components. We recognized Israel as a state on the borders of 1967 in an exchange letters between Yasser Arafat and Ishaq Rabin. And Israel until today did not recognize Palestine on the borders of 1967. Something that we have done September 1st, 1993. The outcome of the Palestinian-Israeli agreement created the Palestinian Authority. And the official name of the Palestinian Authority is PISGA, Palestinian Interim Self-Governing Authority. I myself, I have accepted the agreement because of one thing, which is the letter I. Because I was hoping that I for interim should become by May 4th, 1999, an I for independence. Because the interim agreement should have ended by May 4th, 1999, and Palestine should have moved from it being a Palestinian authority to it becoming an independent state. I think that has not materialized yet. And the relationship between Palestine and Israel had three directions: economic, political, and security. The political track is in serious impasse. The economic track is one way. The Israelis, they export to Palestine a total value of goods and commodities estimated by the World Bank and the Palestinian Ministry of Economy and us at the Palestinian Economic Council for Development and Reconstruction to be up to $6 billion of goods and commodities. Palestinians are only allowed to export to Israel a total value of goods and commodities no more than $800 million. So trade is one way, it's not two ways. We signed with Israel an agreement, an economic track called the Paris Agreement or the Paris Protocol. Israel fully and totally killed the Paris Protocol by imposing closure on the Palestinian territory. The whole idea of the protocol was based on one assumption, that is, free movement of goods and people between the Palestinian territory and Israel. This ended totally and fully by the closure, so traffic is one way, and the infiltration of settlement products into Palestinian territory makes us lose on annual basis a total value of $300 million of taxes, customs, and so on and so forth. On the security track, the Israelis encourage every now and then what is supposed to be, according to the agreement, a Palestinian Authority domain, which is called Area A. The Area A is an area in which Palestinians enjoy a full control over law and order, planning and zoning, and security as well. But since 2002, the Israeli army incursions into the cities, even reaches few meters away from the house of our president. So the agreement that has been signed has not been respected in any way or another, not at the political level, not at the economic level, and not at the security level. In addition to this, ladies and gentlemen, while we are all talking about preserving a two-state solution, and the whole idea of the French initiative is to preserve a two-state solution, the Israeli government on daily basis is working to fully and totally erode the possibility of a Palestinian state by destroying 4 pillars of this Palestinian state: Jerusalem, Area C, Gaza, as well as the Jordan, the Palestinian Rift Valley, and the Jordan Rift. In Jerusalem issue, there are 193,000 Palestinians with Jerusalem IDs who were pushed outside the city because the Israeli planners wanted the demographic balance in the city of Jerusalem to be by 2020 that Palestinians constitute no more than 19% of the total population of Jerusalem. So if you go to see Jerusalem today, it's a sieged city with a wall. Every single Palestinian in the West Bank and Gaza has no right to reach Jerusalem except those who have permit. And those who have permits, like myself as a VIP considered to be, it takes me maybe 2 months to get a permit of 1 day or 2 days. For an average person, it takes him more to reach the Al-Aqsa Mosque or to reach the Jerusalem market, and so on and so forth. So Palestinians have no right even to visit unless you have a special permit from the Israeli military governor, including my case, Nabil, Riyadh, Brahim Khreshi, and all of us. On the issue of the Jordan Valley is 1,622 square kilometers. That is the area west of the River Jordan. The Israelis, they tell us in negotiations, either you give it to us or we take it. In that Jordan Valley, which is 28% of the total area of the West Bank, there are 9,000 settlers only who swim in modern swimming pools while our people have no water to drink. During this very hot summer, a lot of people move from the Jordan Valley to the uphills of Tobas, Tammon, and the areas just seeking water to drink at a time when their water springs have dried up totally. On the third pillar that the Israelis are destroying of the possibility of the Palestinian state is Area C. The West Bank is divided into 3 areas. Area A, where the Palestinian Authority have some control. Area B, where we enjoy law and order, planning and zoning. Area C, that makes 62% of the total area of the West Bank. Israel enjoy law and order, planning and zoning, security, and so on. That area is actually what the World Bank said in their report, that we lose about $3.4 billion annually because the Palestinians have no access to Area C. Israel is using Area C as a geographic reserve for the expansion of Jewish settlements. And as Dr. Nabil Shtayyeh was telling you this morning, the number of settlers in that particular area, including Jerusalem, is about 680,000 settlers at a time when Madrid Conference for Peace started in 91. the number of settlers were only 190,000. So since the beginning of the peace process until today, the number of settlers grown up from 190,000 to 680,000. The other important pillar that Israel is destroying is this unfair criminal siege on Gaza. Our people in Gaza really suffers most. You can consult the reports of OCHA, of the United Nations. You can consult the reports of UNRWA, of ICRC, of the United Nations, of all the reports. And we are happy to see Mr. De Soto here, who is an expert on the Palestinian issues, who work for the United Nations as well. On the other issue, what are the conclusions? Out of this sort of reality, what sort of lessons should the French learn? Should any person who wants to engage in reactivating the peace process, what are the conclusions and what are the lessons that we all should draw? First, Madrid was possible because it was James Baker who took his business card from his pocket, threw it on the table for Ishaq Shamir, and he told him, if you want peace, call me. This is my telephone number. And if you continue with Jewish settlements in the Palestinian territory, there will be no money. There will be no loan guarantees for the Israelis if you continue with the construction of settlements. Madrid was possible because there was an international will. And Madrid was possible because, as I said, there was a negotiated letter of invitation that was mediated by James Baker, who put things in a very clear way to say that the terms of reference for these peace talks are UN resolutions and international law. And that is why Madrid was possible. Oslo was possible also because there was a will of a person. His name was Ishaq Rabin. Rabin was not Mother Teresa. Rabin was a general who broke the bones of our kids during the first Intifada. But Rabin was credible in the eyes of the Israeli people, and Rabin believed in the process. The Oslo process was killed immediately after the assassination of Rabin by an Israeli fanatic who never wanted to see peace. And since the assassination of Rabin, we had two quality people as prime ministers of Israel. Somebody who is either credible but does not believe in the process, or believes in the process but not credible in the eyes of the Israelis. And then when we had Sharon, he had a list of points of agreements, and he decided to reverse every single item in the Palestinian-Israeli agreement. Totally reversed. We ended by having one thing, for example, on the economic track, the tax clearance, and really nothing else. So when it comes to the agreements, Israel totally and fully violated it, and unfortunately, the reverse of the Oslo process was made by the different Israeli prime ministers. The problem with Oslo agreement is the following, that we went into an interim agreement. That was a problem. We should have gone into a comprehensive agreement with some sort of phased implementation rather than interim agreement with phased implementation and so on, because that gave a chance to the different fanatic prime ministers of Israel from Sharon to Netanyahu to reverse things in a totally different direction. Now, in addition to this, I think that one serious problem with the Palestinian-Israeli agreement that the Prime Minister of Israel will come and say, no sacred dates. If dates are not sacred, then you end by having a situation in which a process will start in 91 and in 2016 it is not finished yet. Iran was possible, the 5+1 deal was possible because there was a time frame. And people work under the pressure of time. While on the Palestinian-Israeli track, dates were not secret and the Palestinians were made victims of no option, as if they had no option, which is not true. Either negotiations and so on. And in addition to this, what the Israelis are trying to drive us into a situation in which a status quo will prevail. They should know, Madam Chair, that the status quo is unsustainable. And the status quo is not something that is static. There is a deteriorating reality on the ground every day and every night in the Palestinian territory. And if we don't stop this deterioration today, there will be no possibility for a two-state solution. Now, away from Oslo, then it was Camp David. Dr. Nabil Shtayyeh was in Camp David. I had lunch with Madame Albright at the house of the Swiss ambassador in Washington, and I asked her what went wrong in Camp David. And she said, Ehud Barak was not ready for peace. So the Israelis came to Camp David to prove that we are not ready. We had no offer in Camp David. For those of you who would like to qualify my statement, go and read Rob Malley. Rob Malley now in the National Security Advisory of the White House. He was in Camp David with President Clinton. Read what he wrote. The Palestinians had no offer in Camp David. So, Madam, it is not fair to say that Palestinians had no opportunity to lose an opportunity. We did not have an opportunity in Camp David. We did not have an opportunity with the last talks, and I will touch upon it in a minute. In addition to this, I think also John Kerry's initiative, John Kerry is a good man. He met with our president and his team, including myself, 48 times, 48 rounds, 48 meetings that John Kerry conducted with President Abbas. An average of 2 to 3 hours each meeting, except one of them, it was snowing in Ramallah. The meeting lasted for 25 minutes. What happened? That John Kerry, unfortunately, could not deliver Netanyahu. John Kerry, with all his efforts, couldn't freeze settlements. John Kerry, with all his efforts, couldn't stop violence of the settlers, and so on and so forth. And that is why if you are the strategic alliance of Israel and you cannot deliver Netanyahu, who can? That is the most important thing that we have faced in the negotiations with the rounds of talks between 29th of July 2013 until the 30th of March 2014. It was a total failure, unfortunately. Now, what I want to say is the following. The bilateral paradigm is not anymore possible for the Israeli-Palestinian track. And that is why the French initiative is important, because it takes us from a bilateral paradigm to a multilateral paradigm. And multilateralism has been tested, and it seems it is working. It did work with Iran. It might work with Syria. It is working with Libya. Let it work for Palestine. If that paradigm has been tested and proved to be not successful, let's not focus on that same paradigm. That is why also you need not only a paradigm shift from bilateralism to multilateralism, you need another paradigm shift from the international community relationship with Israel and the international community relationship with us. What used to happen is the following. The international community gives donations to Palestine if the peace process is going well. If the peace process is in an impasse, Palestinians are punished twice. No money and no progress on the peace track. But the party that is the reason and the cause for the failure of the peace process was never punished. So we have to have a new paradigm to link the Israeli behavior vis-a-vis the Palestinian territory with the international economic relations with Israel. Madam Chair, it is the right moment for sanctions. Sanctions worked in South Africa. Sanctions work with Iran. Sanctions should work with Israel. And I think it is the right moment for Israel to pay the price of its occupation to Palestinian territory. The Israeli occupation to Palestine today makes profit. The water balance sheet in the Palestinian territory is 800 million cubic meters. The Israelis take 600 million cubic meters of our water, and they sell us the remains. The Israelis take our land for free. Our fresh and beautiful, healthy environment, the top hills of the West Bank, the land there is confiscated and given to the settlers. The Jordan Valley is the most wonderful area for cultivation of fresh tomatoes and so on, and it's all taken by the Israeli settlers. If this Israeli occupation, and trade is one way, as I indicated earlier, if this Israeli occupation continue without price, it will never end. And it is the responsibility of us, Palestinians, to make the Israeli occupation costly. And it is the responsibility of the international community to make the Israeli occupation costly. Otherwise, why should they leave the beautiful hills of the West Bank and East Jerusalem and so on if there is no price to pay? So there has to be a serious price for Israel to pay. My last point. Any peace process needs a recipe for success. Any negotiations, business, politics, whatever, a husband and a wife, there has to be a recipe for success for any partnership. One is a clear terms of reference. We have to read from the same book that the Israelis are reading. It is not possible that our terms of reference is UN and its resolution vis-a-vis Palestine, and the terms of reference for Israel is, I don't know, maybe the Old Testament or something else. It doesn't work like that. So there has to be an agreed upon terms of reference. One. Second, there has to be what they call in negotiations CBMs, confidence building measures. You cannot sit down with me on a table and at the same time building settlements on the territory that is supposed to be my state. What's the point that you are making? You cannot keep my kids in jail while you are talking peace with me. You cannot confiscate my land if you are talking peace with me. So there has to be serious confidence building measures, because the peace process from Madrid until today was not credible in the eyes of the Palestinian people. We have to make this process possible, credible. We have to make the Palestinian feel that there is a difference between living under occupation and a time of peace and so on. And also, ladies and gentlemen, peace is about good intentions. When Chamberlain signed with Adolf Hitler the Treaty of Munich, the Second War broke 2 months after that. It's a matter of intentions. Netanyahu, I challenge him from this podium. If he says he believes in 2 states, let him put for vote in front of his ministers to vote on a 2 states on the borders of 67. Because we know that this Israeli government is not a government for peace. This Israeli government is a coalition for more settlements, not for peace. And that is why they are rejecting the peace initiative, the French initiative. That is why the whole idea of the French initiative is to preserve a 2 states. And the Israelis are fully and totally rejecting that. And also, believe me, Madam Chair and ladies and gentlemen, a peace process needs an honest broker. If the broker is not honest, if the broker is in strategic alliance with one of the parties, it doesn't work. So that is why the French initiative, maybe it brings a different direction of things. The international community is more responsible, and so on and so forth. And I hope that between today and the resumption of the international conference, the Palestinians, they deserve an international protection. We cannot continue to be victims of an occupier. We have to change the terminology. The issue is not about peace process. The issue is about occupation. People under occupation. Palestinians, they want an end of this oppressing occupation that is the last occupation in the world. This sort of settler colonial phenomena, it has defeated in certain areas and did compromise in other areas of the world. In conclusion, I want to say the following, quoting demographic realities on the ground. Between the River Jordan today and the Mediterranean Sea, 6.8 million Jews. And between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea, on the same day, there are 6.8 million Palestinians, neck to neck, 1 to 1. and bearing in mind population growth rates among Palestinians, which is 3.8%, and among Israelis it is 2.1%. Palestinians by the year 2020, we will be 53% of the total population of historical Palestine. So Israel has to choose today. Either we preserve a two-state and recognize Palestine as a state on the borders of 1967, or the Israelis and us, we will be slipping into the South Africanization of the Palestinian question, in which Israel become a de facto, a de jure apartheid state. Because today, Israel is a de facto apartheid state. It takes me longer to go through a traffic light north of Jerusalem, much longer than for a settler who is crossing from east to west, for a Palestinian who is crossing from south to north. It takes longer for a traffic light even to change to green. Nobody will feel this sort of apartheid. South Africans, when they come to Palestine, they say, my God, even in South Africa, this sort of apartheid system doesn't exist. So today is the moment. Either Israel recognize Palestine as a state on the borders of 67, and I hope that President Obama, before he leaves office, next year it's going to be 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which did give legitimacy, British legitimacy or British declaration for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. Hopefully President Obama, before he leaves office, he comes up to say, I recognize Palestine as a state on the borders of 1967. I hope that the different international capitals who did not recognize Palestine yet to use this leverage, because that serves the Palestinian cause, that serve the Israelis, that serve a two-state solution, that serve peace in the region, and that is an important lesson that we should all draw from the peace process. Without pressure on the ground, there will be no results on the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your insightful information, for opening up our eyes to a lot of issues and items that I think it should be taken into account in the international community and vis-a-vis the international conference where we're going to all meet. The committee is very appreciative of your time, of taking time from your responsibilities to come and share with us the years that you have been involved in the peace process and your view of where should we go from here. Thank you very much. I thank you once again. Thank you. It is very appropriate that our second speaker in this plenary is His Excellency Mr. Michael Molloy, former Canadian ambassador and former chair of the Multilateral Refugee Working Group, which grew out of the Madrid Peace Conference. He was also special coordinator on the Middle East peace process at the Canadian Foreign Ministry, and after retirement, co-director of the Jerusalem All City Initiative, which explore various solutions for the issue of Jerusalem. As a multilateral approach to the Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking is back on the front burner these days, as you have just pointed out, it is very important that we revisit the Madrid process and learn its lessons. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you, sir. You have the floor.
I'll say it again. Thank you, Madam Chair. I must say, Madam Chair, it's extremely unfair for you to put me speaking after this brilliant man next to me. I don't know what you do for an encore in these circumstances, so please bear with me because I'm working at a terrible disadvantage after this. I am going to take us back in time. I'm looking back. That's what I do these days. I just turned 72, and there's more looking back for me than looking forward as a result. And so I'm quite comfortable in doing this. I'm going to talk about the multilateral process that ran for 3 or 4 years after the Madrid conference. So I'm taking us back in time. And as I look around this room, I suspect there are people in this room who weren't born then at this stage, aside from us gray-haired veterans of that earlier time. The Madrid Peace Conference of October and early December 1991 announced, among other things, that in addition to the bilateral negotiations that were to take place between Israel and its neighbors, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and of course the Palestinians, there would be a supplemental process of multilateral working groups that would deal with issues of a regional nature as a way of supporting the bilaterals. And this would bring in members of the international community, again, to reinforce the process. That was the idea. The multilaterals were actually launched about a month later in Moscow in January 1992. And initially, the plan, as we heard it in Canada, was that there were going to be 4 working groups. One would deal with regional economic development, one would deal with environment, one would deal with water, and one would deal with arms control and regional security. The Government of Canada was surprised to be invited to this meeting, surprised and pleased, and we set our sights on chairing the water working group. After all, we have most of the water in Canada, and we thought, well, it's not that political. It would be a safe thing. We could talk about how much water and barrels and tons and which was going what way, and it would be safe. A gentleman just mentioned by my colleague by the name of James Baker ambushed the Canadian delegation upon arrival in Moscow and told them that the Canadians were not going to get water. They were going to get something called the Refugee Working Group. So we went from safe to not safe in 2 or 3 nanoseconds. And that required that our foreign minister, Barbara McDougall, get on the telephone and wake up the Prime Minister of Canada, which is always a bad thing to do, and tell him that, no, it's not about water, Mr. Prime Minister. Mr. Baker says we're handling the refugees. And I must say it took a very long telephone call to persuade the Prime Minister that this was a safe course for our country. At the Moscow meeting, the United States and the then Soviet Union took responsibility for the arms control group. The U.S. took the water working group, and we still resent that. The Japanese were assigned the environmental working group. The European community was given regional economic development, and we, of course, got the refugees. The Americans were eager to differentiate the process that they were launching from the classical UN types of meetings. And for example, there was no chairman. There was a gavel holder, not the hammer holder, right? There's a gavel holder. And the subcommittees were chaired, didn't have chairs. They had shepherds. It was kind of an agricultural sort of nomenclature that was used. And the other interesting thing about them was there were no written records. At the end of each meeting, there would be an oral report from the gavel holder, and you better take notes because that's all there's. No discussion of, no fighting over the words. It was made clear at the very beginning that the purpose of the multilaterals was to support the bilateral negotiations and not to displace them. And we had to be extremely sensitive to that reality. And each of the multilaterals group was handed a mandate by Secretary Baker and theoretically his Russian co-sponsor of the process. The Refugee Working Group mandate was a bit strange. It was to improve the present conditions of refugees and displaced people without prejudicing their future status. So that's 1. 2, facilitate access to family reunification. And 3, contribute to the process of a lasting solution for refugees. But it's made very clear to us we weren't in the business of solving the problem. We were in the business of making things better for the refugees as a kind of foreshadowing of what we all thought was going to happen, which was going to be a resolution to the whole problem. It's interesting to delve into the motives of a little bit of why different countries and institutions came into this process. For the Americans, it was the excuse that was put in the front window of the shop was that this was a way of giving the international community a role in the peace process and possibly involving people and generating more revenues, more funding for things. The historical record now that's available now indicates there was a different motive, a much deeper motive, and that was the Americans were determined to break the barrier that existed at that time that prevented the Israelis from talking to officials of Arab countries. They wanted to create a series of encounters where over time it would become more and more natural for Israelis and Palestinian officials to encounter each other and to talk to each other. That was the underlying motive for this. And when you look back on it now from where we stand today, it was clear that for the Baker and the president at the time, just getting that process going was much more important than whatever results were achieved. It was that the idea of opening up the channels of communication. For the Europeans, who were largely locked out of the process, the economic working group at least gave them a foot into it and a place where their resources could be brought to bear. For Israel, and the Israelis were very skeptical about the process, but they quickly realized that this might open a little window through which they could actually have direct contact with Arab governments who up to that point wouldn't speak to them. So that was the benefit for the Israelis. For Arab governments, with the exception of Syria and Lebanon, the American victory in leading the coalition that liberated Kuwait created a lot of debt chits which the Americans were determined to cash in. And so it was very difficult for Arab governments that had just watched this liberation take place to turn it down. I don't wish to speak from the Palestinians, but my understanding is that there were advantages perceived on the Palestinian side to keeping the international community, particularly the Europeans and the Russians, involved as a kind of counterbalance to the. So you get this combination of forces coming to bear. For the years immediately following the Moscow conference, the working groups, all 5 of them, tended to meet about twice a year. And there were a series of developments, including the Oslo Accords, the Jordan-Israel Peace Treaty, the 1975 interim agreement on the West Bank and Gaza, which created, and the Oslo in particular, created an environment where one could hope. And the Oslo announcements created a profound change in the way that the 5 multilaterals were operating. Up to that point, they tended to be run as seminars, where the hosts, whether it was the Japanese or whoever was hosting, would bring in experts to talk about water or environment or those sorts of things. With Oslo, the regional and the core parties began to have an impact on the direction of the multilaterals, began to bring things to the multilaterals. And so while the American and Russian sponsorship remained an important factor, if you look at what happened in environment and water and the economic one in particular, the region began to take ownership. It's important to remember as well, when assessing this, that the multilaterals were not just set up for the Israel-Palestine track. They were also set up to support the Jordan track, the Syria track, the Lebanon track. And so when you see these working groups going on and doing things, say, in the Gulf, it's because there's a bigger peace process that's involved. The most difficult, I would say, from our perspective, of the working groups was the arms control and regional security, and it had some real accomplishments. There was a tremendous transfer of knowledge from the European, American, Russian engagements. The Cold War was winding down at that stage, and so there had been a tremendous amount of discussion back and forth between the Western countries and the Soviet Union about, what do we do about the fact that we've got all this stuff pointed at each other, that we're going to have to eventually calm down. And so a lot of the methodology invented there with confidence building measures and that sort of thing was transferred to the Arab world in particular. And there was a very sophisticated set of baskets of activities that dealt with principles and concepts, and others that dealt with very practical matters of bringing soldiers together to talk to each other from the different sides. There were over 20 meetings, workshops, and other activities, but eventually, and this only happened in this group, eventually the process ground to a halt over a critical issue, which was the Egyptian perception of what needed to be done and when about Israel's undeclared nuclear arsenal. And the Egyptians' position was that this has to be dealt with first, and then we will deal with peace. And not surprisingly, the Israeli perception was the opposite. Let's get peace, and then we'll talk about our arsenal. So that eventually brought the arms control multilateral to a halt, and it actually achieved gridlock before the process, the larger process, was slowed down. The Economic Working Group appears to have been much more successful, in part because there was a growing understanding of globalization and an understanding among Arab governments in particular that if you wanted to bring in the benefits of globalization, you wanted the world to come with investments and projects and that sort of stuff,